Okay, good evening, everybody. The time being 7:02, I will call this meeting of the Concord Finance Committee to order, and we'll begin with a call of the roll.
Suresh Bhatia.
Present.
Peggy Briggs. Kathy Koklo.
Here.
Eric Dahlberg.
Here.
John Garofalo. Here. Pat Geyer. Greg Ariello.
Here.
Me, I'm Don Kupka. Lindsay Liss.
Here.
Dee Ortner.
Here.
Carlin Reed.
Here.
Paul Rodriguez.
Here.
Kwasi Sadruzman. Sri Tupul.
Here.
Lois Wassoff.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming out tonight for the first Finance Committee public hearing on the 2025 Annual Town Meeting warrant articles. I'm going to read a brief introductory statement and then we're going to get underway. And I've got the agenda up on the screen to give article presenters a heads up of what our order is going to be. If you can get ready, we can move as efficiently as possible. Earlier this year, the Select Board approved a schedule of hearings and other milestones leading up to annual town meeting, which will begin on June 2nd this year. And I've been asked to remind everybody the starting time is 6:30 p.m. on June 2nd, a little bit earlier than usual. Later date, but earlier start time. As an important part of that lead-up process, the Finance Committee will hold a total of 3 public hearings over the next few weeks to review warrant articles with a spending or borrowing component. We don't review all articles. We review only those with a spending or borrowing component. 3 public hearings will occur tonight, April 10th, next Tuesday, April 15th, and then the third and final one on Thursday, May the 1st. You can see the full list of articles that we expect to hear and vote on in our meeting packet tonight, and I'll pull it up on the screen just for a quick sneak peek. There are some late-breaking changes to it, which I will cover shortly. Now, the purpose of these public hearings is for article sponsors to present and solicit public input on each article. They also inform the Finance Committee's deliberations and ultimately our votes on whether to recommend approval or some other action at town meeting. That is our role here. We're not here to formally approve or reject articles. We don't do that. We're making recommendations to town meeting. Now, we can vote in one of 3 ways on each article. First, we can recommend affirmative action. And that is, we think the article should be approved at town meeting. Second, we can recommend no action, and that is, we think it should not be approved. Third, we can defer action, which means we feel like we need more information in order to be able to make a recommendation, and we expect to do so at our meeting, which runs concurrent with town meeting. So we need more time, but we're ultimately going to take a vote. When we recommend taking no action, we can also subsequently support an amendment to an article and recommend affirmative action on the amendment. So there's a few different ways this can go. For each article, tonight we're going to hear a brief presentation by the article sponsor. We ask that sponsors limit those to 5 minutes or so. I'll then invite Finance Committee members to ask any clarifying questions. I ask that Finance Committee members keep their questions relevant to our scope and responsibilities. Impacts to spending, borrowing, revenues, taxes, etc. I'll then turn it over to the members of the public in attendance, here in the room or via Zoom, to ask questions or offer their own input. Members of the public should limit their comments to 2 minutes. If you are in the public hearing room, please stand and line up at each microphone. If you're on Zoom, I'll turn to you after we've heard everybody in the room. I ask you to use the raise hand feature so we know to call on you. We'll follow that cadence for all articles on the agenda tonight and then adjourn the public hearing. After all articles on the agenda are heard, we'll close the hearing and then reconvene in a regular Finance Committee meeting to discuss and possibly vote positions for each warrant article heard during the public hearing. And the regular meetings are, of course, still open to the public. We hope you'll stick around for that. Copies of all public hearing presentation materials and the agendas for each Finance Committee public hearing is included in the Finance Committee packet and will be posted and available on the annual town meeting section of the town's website, along with links to the recordings of each public hearing. As with all public meetings, we expect a civil dialogue. Public comment will be limited only to the article or issue being discussed. We ask all speakers to abide by our time limits, and all public comments must be made through the chair, which is me. Finally, we may need to make adjustments to the order of articles on the agenda or to the list of articles slated for each public hearing. Like I said, there are several updates along those lines for tonight and for our next hearing, which is going to be on the 15th. We don't anticipate a motion on Article 29, the feasibility of acquiring 2229 Main Street. Article 32, betterments for temporary improvements to a private way, Dotton and Dover Streets. My understanding is that there are some significant unanswered questions about this article, and it's likely, it's not certain, but it's likely that this one also, there'll be no motion. Lastly, Article 33, the MCI Concord planning article. The town manager has requested some additional time to finalize the details for this article, so we're going to defer this one until May the 1st. Finally, looking ahead to our next hearing on April 15th, you'll note in the schedule that I'm sharing on the screen, we're going to adjust the order of articles. We're going to take Articles 12, which is the region's the school district, the regional school district's budget, and Article 13, the amenities building, out of numeric order. We're going to take those first, and the reason for that is we're going to hold a joint public hearing with the Carlisle Finance Committee at the start of next Tuesday's session. So they'll join us for the first two articles, then they're free to go. And then we'll go our separate ways and deliberate and ultimately vote separately. Without further ado, let's kick off the public hearing with the first article on our agenda tonight. That is Article 17, Minuteman Regional Technical School District Budget.
Good evening. I'm Steve Ledoux. I'm the Concord rep to Minuteman. It's been a privilege to serve on that committee for the last 6 years. And I would like to introduce Nikki Andrade, who was our school business manager, to make the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here presenting Minuteman's FY26 Superintendent Recommended Budget. So Minuteman Article 17, Mr. Ledoux moves the town appropriate $1,772,373 as Concord's assessed share of the funds for the necessary and expedient purposes of Minuteman Regional Technical Vocational High School, the school district, for the year ending June 30th, 2026. And just to give you a little bit of background on our budget, we have a budget of $32,461,056. It's a 2.99% increase over our FY25 budget last year. And just to give you a little bit more of a breakout, our operating budget is just about $25.5 million. It's up just about 5.5% above the FY25 budget. Some of the main reasons for this include our teachers in the collective bargaining agreement. They have a 3% increase, plus steps and lanes. We've also seen an increase in transportation. We have a new bid and a new transportation vendor starting in July, as well as an increase to our OPEB trust fund. So we have increased that contribution by $300,000 this year, which will be a new baseline, and we will start to increase it 5% every year after that. There was a study committee that determined this was the appropriate year to do that because we are seeing a decrease in our operating capital. I don't know if you can go back to the slide before, but there's about a 21% increase in our operating capital. So we had an old energy savings lease on our old building that we have finally officially paid off. So this was the most appropriate year to increase that contribution to OPEB. In that line is also some capital stabilization and other capital needs around our building. Lastly, our building project jet is 5.6 million, just less than 1% change from last year. We have finally closed out our MSBA project as of August 2024, and we've paid off any short-term debt, so it will just be our debt service payments on that building going forward. Our assessments to our member towns, the overall total increase is 2.79%, just about 26.4 million. And in particular, the assessment to Concord, again, the 1.772, 373, 2.28% increase year over year. This is a further breakout of Concord's preliminary assessment, showing the total just above 1.3 million without the building project debt, and again, that 1.7 million total assessment. And our budget is strongly based on the enrollment and the enrollment per town. Overall, our enrollment, you'll see the blue line is a total 669 students. The red line is our member town students, 632 students. And the green line is our non-member town, which is 37 students. So as we anticipated with the new school building, we have seen an increase over the years in our member towns really being interested and engaged in Minuteman. This slide shows a breakout per town and per class as well. So you'll see here in particular, Concord has 38 students, 10 freshmen, 9 sophomores, 13 juniors, and 6 seniors. So Concord's interest has continued to grow. We have seen this year in the incoming class, we've had 16 applicants. We have 11 accepted for next year, 4 had declined, and 1 we're still waiting on a response from. So we'll continue to see that increase as Concord graduates out 6 students and gets a pretty big freshman class coming in. Here is a breakout per town of the preliminary assessments and the percent increase from FY26 to FY25. We've also included the 4-year rolling average, which is strongly correlated for most of our member towns. You'll see here the 4-year rolling average for Concord was 9.6%. Part of our capital budget, we have a slightly different calculation, which takes into consideration member towns' abilities to pay for the education based on home values and property taxes. So that's a consideration that may slightly change if the percentages aren't exactly correct. So just to wrap up our budget, again, we are moving, or Mr. Ledoux is requesting the town appropriate $1,772,373 for the Minuteman budget. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. We'll start with questions from Finance Committee members, and for this article, we'll start on this end of the table.
Okay.
Paul.
Hi, my name is Paul Rodriguez, and I am curious if the assessed share is the same calculation that has been used in the past.
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Lindsay, any questions? Okay. Kathy.
Yes, could you explain your thoughts on the convergence of the member town enrollments and the non-member town enrollments? It looked like they were pretty equal prior to 2020, but they're quite different now.
So let me just grab that slide. Before the new school building was built, we opened the school building the fall of 2019. Yes. So in part, we did see a big increase in our member town students because of the new school building. The last, part of our regional agreement is that we accept our member town students first. So since 2020, each year we have continued to accept all of our member town students. So the increase is due to just the interest in our school. If there is some reason we don't fill all of our seats with member towns, we do open that to our out-of-district students, but per our regional agreement, we offer all of our seats to our member town students first.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions going this way? D.
Thank you. Nikki, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the top 3 challenges facing Minuteman Tech.
Absolutely. You wanna finish? All right. So Mr. Ledoux is going to speak to the lottery a little bit, which is a hot topic right now with, going on with the Board of Education in particular. Some of my thoughts as a business manager, certainly we have a new superintendent this year. She's gone through her entry plan. So it's part of figuring out what her visions and what her strategic goals are for the school. So I think that, is part of, how we're going to shape the school in the upcoming years. I think certainly expanding access with this lottery situation is certainly a hot topic. Some of the other things we've seen increased costs in particular for homeless, foster care, special education, transportation. Our school is made up of this year, it was 60% of our incoming freshman class required IEPs, and approximately 45% of our school as well. So that's certainly something that we've seen and always keep in mind. And certainly just the past few months, the inflation, the cost of supplies, which everyone has seen, is certainly something that we always keep in mind, especially with our students really doing hands-on work. They use the materials that everybody else uses, the wood, the metal, to really get that hands-on experience in the classroom. So that's certainly something that we're keeping in mind as we're going through this budget and in next budget. And I will have Mr. Ledoux talk a little bit about the lottery.
So there hasn't been a lot of publicity about the lottery, and Department of Ed is seriously considering requiring a lottery for admissions as opposed to the way we do it now, which is kind of an application process, interviewing, and things like that. And we had a lengthy discussion at the school committee Tuesday night, and we obviously voted to oppose it. But one of the things is that, like, for example, under the regional agreement, Concord is guaranteed 15 slots a year in the school. If you have a lottery, that may not happen. It may go to some other town students or whatever. So we are going to be sending some information out to our member towns at the Select Board and Finance Committee, because we would like to have an effort to write Department of Ed to say this lottery system isn't really fair, and all the regional voc schools are pretty much against it. So that could seriously change the complexion of the district and basically more or less throw out the regional agreement. So that's something we're deeply concerned about, and hopefully won't happen, but we definitely will get some information out to both the Select Board and the Finance Committee. Thanks.
Thank you.
Greg.
Question on transportation. Do you guys measure utilization of transportation?
As far as capacity of the
Yeah,
buses?
not capacity, but right, you have a plan here for $48,000, right? So I'm assuming that is a given route or routes. Do you measure how many people actually use the transportation?
I'm not sure if I totally understand your question.
So we'll just say there's a transportation going from the high school, Concord Carlisle
Yep.
High School to Minuteman.
Yep.
Costs $47,000 per year of use. You guys have that there. If nobody takes it, it still goes every day.
Oh.
Do you guys actually measure how many people would utilize
We
the
do.
transportation?
In particular, transportation has been a hot topic, and we actually make stops, not necessarily congruent stops, but at houses. So we do have a lot of stops, and that's something that they've seriously considered looking at because, in particular for our towns that are pretty far out, Lancaster, Stowe, Bolton, they could have, upwards of an hour and a half drive to get to school. So certainly that's something that we work with our transportation company on. We've also looked into with our new transportation company this app, and it's called BusRite, I believe. And it's an app that parents can see where the bus is. It can track when the bus stopped, where, how long it was stopped, how long it took the student to get on. So that's certainly something that we're looking at with our new company going forward, is assessing, are these routes, the most efficient use of time, and being able to be more transparent and clear with the parents, and at any time Minuteman would be able to see where that bus was, did they stop, how long did they stop, and get any footage from the.
So each town doesn't have, like Concord doesn't have its own sort of bus, like, hey, we pick up at the high school and we'll drive you over. You're saying it's on a route, it would hit like Carlisle, then Concord, then, so.
Yeah, right
Okay.
now it's more specific stops at students' houses. So
Okay.
if there was a case where a student wasn't taking that stop, it would be a discussion with the transportation company and us to, do we still need that stop?
Right, thank you.
Any other questions here in the room from Finance Committee members? Okay, going online, any Finance Committee members joining us via Zoom? Any questions? Colin, Suresh?
No.
Shri?
No.
Okay. With that, we will open it up to public input, and we will start here in the room. I've been asked to request that you speak clearly into the mic. I understand we had some audio challenges during the planning board hearing in this room last night. As you approach the mic, please introduce yourself and share your input.
Yes, Sven Weber, 50 Belknap Street, speaking on my own behalf. A couple of questions. So there's a slight decrease in total student numbers over the last 2 years. So what is your total capacity? Where would you say is you're fully loaded? And do you expect that slight decrease continuing over the next years? And then I have a follow-up question.
Sure. Access and expanding access is certainly something that Minuteman is looking at. We currently have an EMAC, enrollment, membership, access, and capacity group that's looking at it. We had been, allocating a certain amount of slots. We're certainly looking at, are we utilizing all of those slots to capacity as far as vocationally? So that's certainly something that we anticipate getting some more answers on in the future with that committee. As far as, I kind of did address the question, we did accept all of our member town students that had applied, and we did accept some out-of-district students as well. I wouldn't anticipate a decrease in our total enrollment again.
So do you have empty seats then right now? So you're below capacity, or because it's 5% below where it was 2 years, so I assume you're 5% below capacity.
We are, so, one of the reasons is that, we had a slight decrease in enrollment for our sophomore class if someone decided it wasn't the right fit for them and wanted to transfer out. It's really hard to replace, a sophomore, junior, senior. You really need to have that vocational training in the beginning, right at that freshman year. So, overall, we don't have a capacity issue. We've, been able to accept the students that are, applied to become.
So in the entry classes, you're full.
Yes.
So then, are you making analysis why you're losing students in higher grades?
Yes, that is, we have a director of marketing and admissions, and certainly, it's our superintendent's first year, and she's working with this committee to ensure that, expanding access and the capacity of the school is at the right spot.
And then my final question is from a teacher utilization. What are the contact hours you define as a full-time equivalent teacher? I know industry standard is 24. So are you measuring it similar, or where do you see a full-time equivalent teacher in terms of contact hours?
The teachers work 6.8 hours per day in contact with the student. Is that what you're asking?
6.8 times 5. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Ned Perry, 362 Bedford Street. I thank you very much for all your leadership of the school, and great school it has been for many years. I would hope that in your presentation, either in the briefing book for the town of Concord or in your presentation at our annual town meeting, you could include the cost per student from Concord, and you could show the history of the cost for Concord over the last 5 years, perhaps. Again, we will be putting together a briefing book for the annual meeting, which will have a lot of information about all the warrant articles, if you prefer to have it there. But I think it's helpful for the voters to see those pieces of information. Thank you very much for all you do.
Absolutely. We did include that in our finance committee, but we'll certainly can add that to the slide for town meeting.
Great. Any public input online? Any hands raised? None? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the next article, which is Article 22, Retirement Board Stipends.
Good evening, folks. My name is Peter Fulton. I'm at 31 Winthrop Street in West Concord. Been on the board now 25 plus years. I was member of the fire department here for 34 years, and there's a little novelty. I go far back that you had to live in town to take a job here, so I don't think that's happening too much anymore. Anyway, I didn't get a smile out of you. Okay. Okay, we're here to for your consideration on this Article 22. Second slide, please. Thank you. Second slide, please. As fiduciaries, board members are responsible for the investment and management of the retirement fund. Members are required to comply with Massachusetts procurement laws for obtaining investment management services, actuarial services, accounting services, master trust custodial services, and legal services. Members are required to comply with the public employee conduct provision in Chapter 268. Next slide. Thank you. I'm just going to digress from the slide here for a minute. The makeup of the retirement board, this is a statutory makeup statewide. As you'll see here, there's 104 boards. I should have introduced Eric Macy to my right, by the way. He's our 5th board member. The makeup of the board is 2 elected members, either from the active retirees or active employees. There's a position known as the in this case, the town accountant is the, pardon me, thank you, Anthony. The ex officio is the, whether it's a city structure or a town structure, that's the 3rd member. There's a selectman's appointee, and then there's 2 elected, one of which is myself. And a 5th member is appointed by the other 4. So all of the board members must file a statement of financial interest and filed with PERAC, and that's this, the state oversight agency, Public Employee Retirement Administration Commission. And they're fairly stern and fairly rigid in their requirements for board members and all our actions, and they keep a pretty close eye on everyone. Another thing that we are obligated to fill out here is a statement of financial interest, an annual disclosure form required by the Public Employee Retirement Administration Commission to ensure no financial conflicts of interest exist, detailing personal assets and other financial holdings. This form is pretty intrusive, and statewide I've understood that some board members have left their service from various towns because they didn't want to fill this stuff out. They're asking about mortgage information and personal savings and what does your wife invest in and so forth and so on. Another obligation we have is to actively engage in investing and managing approximately $294 million in the pension fund by diversifying the investments of the system so as to minimize the risk of large losses. This requires all board members to be bonded. Now, yes, the system does pay for our bonding fee. Annual training requirements. During each full term of the service, retirement board members shall undertake 18 hours of training during each year of their 3-year term. And we also participate hiring and oversight of the Concord retirement system, including the executive director and all supporting staff. And I believe, should you have any questions that I can't answer or Eric can't answer, I believe our executive director is on a Zoom connection. How many, as you can see here, how many boards statewide receive stipends? 74 of them out of the 104. And you can see the average stipend, 44% of the boards receive $4,500 annually. This is the key thing here, in my opinion. Where does the money come from? The money specifically for this stipend is going to be from the retirement board's operating system, which is taken from the income, the investment income received. And I believe that's the final slide, isn't it? It's fairly involved here, so the board, I've been doing it for 25 plus years now, so I'll let Eric have a few comments.
Great. Thanks. So I'm the 5th board member, and I just wanted to give a little bit of perspective, like why are we here? Why are we even having this conversation? My family's been very engaged in Concord on the volunteer community. As our select board members, finance committee, you guys give all your time. This isn't about time. It is a lot of time to do this, but I think it's a little bit different, this board, than most committees, been my experience in Concord. And Peter highlighted a few, but let me just dig into it a little bit more. So there's 104 retirement plans in the state. 74 of them have this stipend, we don't. So we're an outlier. That in and of itself doesn't mean we should do it, but we are an outlier. My term came due recently, and I wasn't sure I was going to continue on. We went out publicly and advertised to fill the position, and certain people applied, and then once they found out that we were outside of the practice of offering stipends, which most plans do, they withdrew their applications. So from a competitive perspective, this doesn't put us in a good light. And when we leave, we want this thing to be well-governed and set up to succeed, which is the driver of this. Secondly, Peter walked through the financial obligations. So I had to go, I live on Lowell Road, I'm doing this to give back to the community, and I have to disclose all my financial assets and liabilities to the state. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go through all my fidelity statements and show everything I own and show why I don't have conflicts of interest. It's pretty intrusive. That's one thing. We are all fiduciaries on the plan. So we take on fiduciary responsibility. If we do something egregious, any board member could be sued. There's insurance taken out on each of us individually, but before I agreed to join, I met with a lawyer to make sure I wasn't putting myself at such harm. Again, it just makes it, from other committees and boards that I've joined in town, just makes it a little bit different. And then the continuing education requirements are pretty extensive as well. But it's not really about the amount of work. I think our driving factor here, we've had this conversation at the board level for 2 years, and I don't know how long Peter will do it. I don't know how long I will do this. The only thing I don't like about this is it sounds self-serving. And if we could structure it in a way that this wasn't implemented for a couple years when we all fell off, I'd be fine with that. But I think our town is best served by creating something that's a little more in line with the way it's done out in the marketplace. There's a Middlesex Community Retirement Board, which Acton and Maynard and Bedford are all a part of. They have the stipend as well. So this is not an outlier situation at all. I'll stop talking and answer questions.
We have entertain any questions?
Okay, we'll start with Finance Committee member questions, and this time we'll start on that end of the table. Any questions?
yeah, if all of you receive the maximum amount, what is that as a percentage of the annual income earned?
I have one statistic from the actuarial, and the town of Concord routinely, their appropriation via the finance committee and the town budget is $7 to $8 million, I believe is the accurate figure. So as of September 24th last year, September of 24 last year, it's 1/4 or 1/3 of 1%, if I'm answering your question correctly, out of the town's appropriation. But as you can see on the slide, this $19,000 stipend divided by 5 people is going to be funded by the investment returns.
But I think it's important to put this in context. Great question, but this is well, I don't know because the stock market's been crashing lately, but this is a $230 million plus pool of pension assets. This is sizable. I think this is very nominal for what is actually being done.
Other FinCom member questions? Greg?
Just to continue on that, I would recommend that you put the number of board members on the slide at town meeting so everybody gets that in their head. Oh, this is going to be,
Okay.
what was the number you said, $19,000 rather than...
Yeah, my apologies. So it's...
it would just be good so that everybody does understand that. Do you guys know how many people actually take the stipend in the, right, it says 44% receive. Is that other towns that actually have like one or more members? Or is it or is it other towns that have all members receiving that? Sorry.
Yeah, they all receive it. All, as I say, with the exception of the teachers' union, the teachers' system, and the Boston system, which is exorbitantly large, they're all five-member boards.
No, my question was, okay, we have the 5 members, and you guys were saying it was so intrusive to do it, right, that some people just might not even take the stipend because they don't want to show all the stuff to the town. In other towns, do all 5 members do it, or is it like one in each of the other towns, just to get a gauge?
As far as I know, any board system that takes the stipend, all 5 members take it, yes. I might have confused you there. People that were sitting on retirement boards, they felt this statement of financial interest to fill that out was too onerous, and they left the service of the board.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Other FinCom questions? Going this way. Dawn?
Okay, a couple of quick ones. Who sets the minimum maximum, 3,000 and 4,500?
I believe that's a PEREC statute, in other words, our oversight agency.
It's the state regulator.
Yeah.
That regulates and oversees all 104 plans in the state.
Okay.
They set that.
All right. And presumably if they raise that in the future, you'll adjust as well, or?
Yeah,
We don't
I mean,
know.
it depends on the tone of the board at the time. We'd return to you folks for endorsement at that time also.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess I was thinking as you were speaking about how invasive the vetting is and the disclosure, that if you weren't going to do something like this, I could understand that. The stipend probably wouldn't sway that, right? Yeah, okay. So what difference do you think it'll make to have the stipend?
Again, Eric mentioned looking ahead to the future and interest, if you will, in serving on this board because of the responsibilities.
Let me answer that. I don't know the answer to your question, but it's been a recruiting problem for us. We've tried, and people have said, no, thank you. It's a small community, the municipal pension landscape. We're very fortunate. We've just hired a new retired administrator. It was extremely difficult. Came from another town who did a similar thing, and you find that there's a lot of movement within the community. And so it is pretty tight-knit. So we're known that we don't pay, and it's a little bit of a problem. We don't have to do it, but it's just a little more uphill. I think it's just more of a reflection of, okay, it's a little different. We're going above and beyond. There's a lot of requirements, a lot of stuff you have to do. I was told in December by PIRAC, the regulator, that if I didn't go get 9 hours of continuing education experiences, I'd be kicked off the board. You know, so it's just stuff like this. I think it's just a reflection. This isn't, you're right, you're not going to do it for $3,000 or $4,000.
Thanks.
Kathy?
Just to clarify a question, most of the committees here in town are made up of residents of the town volunteering their time. You mentioned recruiting from other towns. Can you explain that?
Well, as far as board members go, I think Eric was referring to the executive director as far as recruiting. Is that what you meant? Well, and also fifth members. Right, yeah, fifth members. Yeah.
I didn't hear what you said.
The fifth member, so it's 2 town employees, and then there's two folks that are elected by the participants, the police, the fire, whatnot. And then there's a fifth member that, in my situation, it's me. It can be a citizen, it doesn't have to be a citizen. It could be somebody from Maynard, it could be somebody from elsewhere that has the experience and the interest to go out and serve in this role. And the next time we come around, we invite all of you to apply. And we would love that, but we've struggled to get people in these roles.
I'm just trying to reconcile. You've said that, I thought I heard you say that trying to get that person, they have the experience of being paid from another town. And I'm assuming that all of our committee members are residents of this town. No?
Not necessarily. It doesn't have to be that way.
Okay, thank you.
How will it be decided what exact amount will be paid between the 3,000 and the 4,500?
Well, our petition here, or our warrant item, is to request the $4,500 stipend.
Okay, because it says of not more than 4,500.
Okay, well, if
Yeah.
that, we'll be glad to clarify that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a regulated number. That's PIRAC.
Yep.
The supervising authority has said, you can do this. It can't be less than 3,000. You can't do a $2,000 stipend. It can't be more than 4,500. So each board with local community support, you figure out what makes sense for you.
And it will be 4,500 in this case?
Yep.
Okay.
Where does the stipend come from if there are no investment income in a given period?
I believe the warrant says that it will come from the standing balance of the retirement system, which in this case is $294 million. So,
Okay,
yeah.
I'm just clarifying like
Sure.
if there is
Thank
another
you.
source in case
Yeah.
that occurs, like
Yeah.
with the market.
Okay, before we go to FinCom members online, my own questions. One, when did the state set up this option? When did this first get passed?
That's a good question. I don't know if I could answer that. The past executive director started to pursue this and did some research on it 2 or 3 years ago, and we've been bouncing it around at various board meetings. I honestly don't know how far back it goes.
Okay.
I'm going to speculate it was part of 2012 pension reform, which a lot of these rules that we cater to here, are obligated to fulfill were initiated.
Okay. Assuming it is 2012, which is scary to think it was 13 years ago,
Yeah.
why now do you want to do this? Why hasn't this come up? Why hasn't this come to town meeting between 2012 and now?
I'm getting some clarification here from Anthony. Thank you. It was an act in 2011 that this stipend was made public or available for the boards. Yeah.
Okay. So why now? Why 2025?
Consensus from the board. Yeah. It is,
Okay.
there's a lot of, I'm sitting as the chairman, so we've had a lot of unique issues the last 4 or 5 years. I know you folks put in the ungodly hours too, but if you do the math on the hours that I've put in and the $4,500 per year, it comes out to short money.
Okay. My second question is, does receiving the stipend qualify you for any other benefits? And I ask because I'm aware in other towns, this is different. We're not talking about a retirement board. There are towns that offer stipends to, say, members of the select board, and the act of receiving the stipend qualifies them as special town employees, which entitles them to benefits like health insurance and everything else. It doesn't sound like that's relevant here, but I'd ask you to confirm.
I'd be happy to confirm that. No, there's no additional benefit or what have you beyond the stipend itself. Each individual, I'd be paid slightly differently because I'm a retiree versus the active employee that's the other elected member, for example. So, but no dental plan, deferred comp, anything like that. Now, I can understand why you asked this question. It's a good question. But that is the case. It's just strictly the stipend.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Finance Committee members online. Colin, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, thank you. Am I correct in understanding that the costs that the board members incur for training, for travel, the bond, for the attendance of conferences, that all the expenses are reimbursed, so there's no out-of-pocket expense by the board members?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. So then what does the $4,500 pay for?
Again, this is, I'm speaking for the 4 other board members, and it's a stipend for the incentive to continue to serve on the retirement board.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Other Finance Committee members online, Shri and Suresh?
No.
Okay. With that, we'll open it up to public input. Anybody here in the room like to provide input or ask a question regarding Article 22? Seeing no one approaching the microphone online, do we have any hands raised? Okay.
Thank you
We can
very
hold
much
it
for your
there. Thank
time.
you.
Thank you. Thank you for your service also.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next article, which is Article 23, Acceptance of the HERO Act.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Meredith Stone. I'm the assessor. Article 23, Acceptance of the HERO Act. Dr. Tilley will move that the town take affirmative action on Article 23 as printed in the warrant. Sessions Law Acts of 2024, Chapter 178. Next slide. The HERO Act, Mass General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 5, Clause 22I, tax exemption for veterans, disabled veterans, Chapter 178 of the Acts of 2024. Next slide. Explanation of the HERO Act is an exemption to determine whether the town will accept the provisions of Chapter 178 of Acts of 24 referred to as the HERO Act, property tax exemption for veterans in the town of Concord. The explanation is additional monies and tax exemption for disabled veterans. The additional monies will come out of the fiscal year 2026 overlay account, and the additional monies are not reimbursed from the state. It will come from the town. Next slide. And which, if accepted, would increase the amount of tax exemption granted to veterans beginning in fiscal year 26 on their domicile under Clause 22, 22A, B, C, D, E, and F, annually by the cost of living adjustment determined by the Department of Revenue. Next slide. Mass General Laws, Chapter 59, Section 5, Clause 22I, acceptance of this act by the town of Concord needs to be a vote of approval at annual town meeting. And more of an explanation is, for example, if we accept this act, in 2024, we had 42 veterans enrolled in Clause 22 exemptions. If the cost of living was 5% for FY26, then 32 of those would see $40 increase on $800 amounts we give now. 10 of those would see a $100 increase on the $2,000 amount we give now. Clause 22I would not be reimbursed by the state. The total amount would cost the town $2,280, and that would come out of the overlay account. Thank you. Any questions?
Finance Committee member questions, and we'll start on this end this time. Questions?
It would be very useful if those numbers were included in the slides, because when you just look at the slides as they're prepared, you have no idea the impact or extent of this.
Okay,
So,
I'll add that.
Yeah,
in
it would be
there.
very helpful to just have a sense of the scale of it.
Thank you.
Don?
In the explanation on slide 3, you mentioned this is tax exemptions for disabled veterans. Is this limited to disabled veterans, or is this for, do all veterans qualify?
Only disabled veterans that receives exemptions, 10% or more.
I see. Thank you.
How do you determine, is there some objective criteria for determining who qualifies, some other mechanism that's used?
If a veteran lives in Concord and has their DD 214 showing that they were honorably discharged and has a 10% service-related disability or more, then they are approved.
Okay.
Greg?
Can you just clarify, you said if it was enacted today, it would be $2,000? Is that roughly what you just said?
So it depends on the percentage of disability. 10% would be $800, and if they, depending on the clause, $2,000 would be 22E, and they would get $1,000. We match at $1,000, and then we'd do the cost of living would be another $100.
So that's per individual? Is
Per
that,
individual
okay, that's
that
what I wanted to clarify. So
qualifies.
per individual, and you said there was, how many again in Concord?
There's 10.
There's 10, okay.
Yeah, and that would be $100 each.
Okay, just to give a little sort of perspective, thank you.
I'll put a slide in there to make it detailed.
Yeah, just
Thank
to
you.
see the breakdown, thank you.
Just one more, Dr. Tilly. What is your role?
As what? As an assessor?
Yeah, this is an assessment.
So my role is to make sure that they have a domicile in Concord and that they have their DD 214 showing that
Okay.
their percentage of disability, and to let them know that they have this benefit. And tonight, I'd like to get them even more of a benefit for their service for the country.
Got it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other Finance Committee member questions here in the room?
I have one.
Paul?
So I looked the law, and are you sure that it's honorable conditions or other than dishonorable conditions? That's a
So it's
different thing.
only honorable discharge. It has to be honorably discharged. If someone's not honorably discharged, they would not be allowed to have it. Yeah.
Okay. My own question before we go online. Looks like this was signed into law in 2024. So this
2024,
okay,
Governor
so
Maura
this is
Haley did that, yes.
our first opportunity to do this. We're taking advantage of it.
Exactly.
Okay. And you said the money would come entirely out of the overlay account?
Yes, the cost of living adjustment would, yes.
Okay. Okay. Finance Committee members online. Colin, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, Ms. Jones. I was wondering about how well marketed this benefit is or will be to the veterans. And also, I think you said 42 get some benefit. I'm wondering how many veterans we have in Concord who could be eligible but may not be taking advantage of this.
We have a wonderful veterans agent, and he's very well aware of who is and who isn't, and we have promoted this pretty much so. So the ones that qualify, he sends to us. Council on Aging encourages it. We put it in the bridge. We make sure while we're putting it out for town meeting to let them know. We're constantly doing reach out.
Other Finance Committee members online, Suresh and Shri, any questions?
I had a question.
Shri.
This is Shri. Yeah. Is this every year do we have to do it, or is it just one? If you do it once, it's we don't have to bring it up every year?
That's a great question. Every year you have to apply. We don't follow if you move, relocate, die. We don't follow that, so you have to apply every year.
Okay, thank you.
No, to apply for an exemption. Yeah. This is just once locally adopted, then it will continue unless we wanted to rescind it, which I wouldn't imagine that would happen.
Okay. Turning to public input. Anybody here in the room like to offer public input or ask a question about Article 23? Yes.
Good evening. Carmen Reese, Town Moderator, 52 Devon Street. I noticed that your slide said that the funds to cover the additional exemption would be from the fiscal year 2026 overlay account.
Right.
So would that be the case every year, that it's the overlay account that is the source?
Yes, that would be for the additional monies. Yes.
Okay, so I think it's important that you fix that on your slide so that going forward, it would come out of the overlay account, not just in 2026.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other input or questions here in the room? Seeing no one approaching the microphone online, do we have any hands raised? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next article on the agenda is Article 25, Transfer of Peabody School and Appropriate Funds.
Thank you and good evening. I'm Carrie LaFleur, Town Manager. Article 25 requests that town meeting authorize the transfer of the Peabody School property and appropriate $100,000 from free cash to cover the building's carrying costs for fiscal 26. Next slide, please. At special town meetings in 2022 and 2023, the town appropriated funds for the construction of a new middle school. The project included 3 distinct elements: construction of the new building and fields, the demolition of the existing Sanborn School, and surplusing of the Peabody School property. Next slide. The Peabody School property includes 3 parcels: 1231 Old Marlborough Road, which is the site of the school, which is about 8 acres. 78 Old Pickard Road, which is Cushing Field, and it's 9.96 acres. And 688 Powder Mill Road, which is believed to be the site of the school septic system, and that's 2 acres. I know, I don't know, how do we not know that? But I'm just repeating what I was told. Together, these 3 parcels total 20 acres. Next slide.
How many acres? 20.
So when municipal buildings are commissioned, they are placed under the care, custody, control, and management of a specific municipal authority. In the case of school buildings, care, custody, management, and control is given to the school committee, who hold this authority until such time as the building is no longer needed to serve an educational purpose. With the opening of the Ellen Garrison building at Concord Middle School, the Peabody School property is no longer needed and therefore can be surplused. Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 15A, establishes a process for transfer of a municipal property. This process requires both a vote of the school committee and a vote of town meeting to effectuate the transfer. In this case, the school committee took its vote on February 4th, 2025, and we are here asking that town meeting make its vote as well. Next slide, please. The future use of Peabody School property is yet undetermined, but the town has committed to undertake a comprehensive process to review its land and building assets, some of which are shown here on this slide, to determine best future use. This work will be conducted by a new land use working group to be appointed by the Select Board in the coming months. Next slide. In addition to the property transfer request, we're seeking an appropriation of $100,000 from free cash to cover the building's carrying costs for fiscal '26. These carrying costs detailed on this slide include utilities, insurance, minor maintenance, and some amount for estimated legal expenses as we work through potential reuse options. We ask for this additional expense to be appropriated in a standalone warrant article because these are over and above the town's fiscal year budget, and we want to keep them segregated. I apologize. We're getting really close to the 19th, and we are really exhausted, and this mic is all over the place. So we want to make sure that we are keeping these segregated to have maximum transparency, because if we don't need to expend this full amount, we want to make sure that we can return it back to the town's fund balance. So the last slide. On behalf of town staff, I ask for your support for Article 25 to transfer the Peabody property and to authorize the building carrying costs for fiscal '26. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions from members of the Finance Committee, starting on that end of the table. John, all set? Greg?
So can you explain slide number 5 a little bit? Because they both have roughly $100,000 listed there. Which one are you, is the cost fully occupied and the cost prorated?
So the issue that we have when the building is not occupied, the insurance costs go sky high. Some of you may know we've already experienced some minor vandalism at that building. Our intent would be to put some municipal operation in there. We're thinking maybe facilities, just to have a regular presence in the building so that we can bring that insurance cost down. But right now, we haven't made that decision, and we want to have the ability to fund the full insurance cost if it doesn't make sense to have an operation.
So that 100,000 is sort of a mix if you go 40% or if you go fully occupied?
So we were, and I actually thought I took that other column out because it is confusing. So if the building is fully occupied, obviously the utility costs are much higher. If it is not occupied, it's the insurance cost that's driving it. We use the 40% prorated that came up from our facilities department as what the cost, an estimated cost of the utilities, because we have to keep the heat at a certain level, so the pipes don't freeze and that sort of thing.
Okay. Final question. If the town does not pass this, what happens?
If the town does not pass the transfer or the appropriation,
I'll say more
of
the
both.
money. The transfer, I think, would probably go. But if the town doesn't approve the $100,000, what?
If the money doesn't go, I think the town side is going to refuse the transfer. I mean, we don't have this in our budget, so we need the additional cost. We're not looking to take it into the town budget again because we don't know on an ongoing basis whether or not we'll have a town presence there or what the disposition would be. If we were to use that as a municipal building in 27 more fully, we would be pulling that into our budget and then figuring out how to manage it within our budget. But in this transition year, we really need to have these additional funds.
Got that, yep.
Just one question about a transition year. Could we have several transition years?
We may.
And each year it would be a certain amount of money that we would have to find in addition to what this year is?
If we have multiple transition years, there is a potential that we would be looking for supplemental appropriations each year. Haven't decided that, but that is a possibility.
Thank you.
Peggy.
If you can, you're thinking potentially putting a town department in there. I'm wondering if you are thinking of potentially renting it out for a fee.
That is also a possibility.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of vacant buildings at all because of the crime that takes place in them. And I'm not a fan of spending more money on more buildings without a plan, you know. Even a date certain to know whether or not we have a use for it. So I would love it if, when we come to town meeting, you could say, here's our plan. That if we'd like to use it for facilities, we're going to free up space in another building, save money there, and essentially, you know, transfer some of that cost center to this location, something of that sort, while the select board figures out whether or not to sell it or to redevelop it for affordable housing or whatever the options may be. But this indeterminate thing is really bothering me, and I know it's a difficult process, a difficult decision, but that doesn't mean we should just defer it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
So you were saying if the town doesn't approve the 100,000 in free cash, that you're likely not to accept the transfer. Would that mean that the schools would be responsible for paying this 100,000 out of their operating budget next year?
Yeah, I'm sort of joking that we wouldn't take it. It would be hard because
Okay.
then we would be looking to cut something else in the budget to hold a building. If the transfer didn't happen, the school is obviously responsible for it. We have a lot of interest in the property. We have a lot of opportunities for anybody who's been following all of the potential development opportunities. There are a lot, and we have lots of ideas for that building, but they're really all over the place right now.
And just a quick related question. So the schools are paying right now for the unoccupied costs through the end of this fiscal year, right?
The schools are paying all costs associated with that building.
We talked about the use of the building, but there was 3 parcels. I'm not going to talk about the septic system field, but there's the field. Is any uses happen with that currently?
So the uses that are occurring on that field right now will continue, and the maintenance, that's something that's already programmed into our public works budget and also funded through recreation, because our recreation department has activities there. So the fields will be maintained in the same condition as now.
The reason why I asked the question is because we're looking at this property transfer only at the cost of the building, yet I suggest that you highlight that continued use of those fields because I know they're popular, will continue, just to highlight it and put it up there.
Okay.
Dawn,
Yeah,
follow up.
one more question. Is one of the potential uses for it by the schools themselves? In other words, are they considering moving administrative offices there from Ripley or any other site?
Not that I'm aware of, and I think if they had a strong interest in that, they might not be looking to transfer the property.
That's where I was headed.
Yeah.
If that was on the table, I would want to run that to ground. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Before we go online, my own question. We're very concerned about reserves. We had a discussion with the members of the select board last month about free cash and stabilization funds. Did you look at other sources of funding ahead of free cash? What was your rationale for free cash?
So the building has some maintenance needs. The elevator in particular is operating on borrowed equipment that needs to be returned. So the current ability to rent this building is limited somewhat. So to me, that would be the only, aside from cutting something in the existing town budget to free up some funding, the only other option that I would think would be rental income, and we don't feel that the building is in a position right now to be rented.
Okay. Finance committee members online. Colin, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, I was wondering about a timeline. in your ideal world, Gary, what would you think would be a reasonable timeline to consider what to do with Peabody and its disposition?
So as I mentioned, the select board is standing up a land use matrix committee. Their charge was approved, I believe, at the March 17th meeting, or at least at that meeting there was a draft of that. The outline in that, the charge of that committee, is for them to conduct their work over the next 12 months. And so this consideration of reuse of Peabody is part of the charge of this committee. So we're looking at a 12-month period before they would come back with a report.
Suresh and Shri, any questions? Okay.
Nope.
We'll open it up to public input. Does anybody in the room have input or questions related to this article? Seeing no one, anyone online with their hand raised? Go ahead, Paul.
Hi. Kerry, a quick question. You mentioned that the building had been subjected to vandalism. I didn't see any security costs in the existing tabulation or in the future. How do we cover security costs, and what is the security at the building going forward?
So I know there is security at the building now, and I believe the costs to cover that going forward are included in the utilities, but I would have to double check with our facilities director to make sure.
Would there be any additional security issues if it were fully abandoned?
Well, it's going to be tough to keep that building secured if it's fully abandoned, whether or not it has a security system. I think we feel pretty strongly that it makes sense to have some presence in the building, and I think before town meeting we would have that decision made. We just haven't really had the opportunity to fully vet that. Again, just because of the volume of things that are happening right now, everything's kind of put in suspense right now. But I do think that we will have that decision made before town meeting, and perhaps we could make some adjustment to the request as well.
Eric? Yeah, Carrie, that was my question. If that decision is made, is it possible you won't need the whole 100? That would bring down some of the costs that are specified on that slide?
Yes, so the insurance cost in particular will come down. And then we'd have to look at the utility costs, because there might be some slight increase in the utilities, but I would assume the reduction in insurance would more than offset any increase in utilities.
It looks like we have some follow-ups from FinCom members. Paul, are you all set? Did you have any follow-ups?
No, I forgot to introduce myself. Paul Bum, 11 Ridgewood Road. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. Any other members of the public with their hand raised online? Mark.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment. As Carrie mentioned, we are proposing the land use matrix committee work on the disposition of Peabody School with community input. And we've established a timeline of approximately a year for that. I think we need to think about this expenditure as maintaining an asset for future use in the town. And so that I appreciate the question about what is the timeline for Peabody, but I think the question that has to go before that is what is the future use of Peabody, and that is something that we recognize we need community input and it needs to be in a context. So I think that it probably makes sense to make sure that that is front and center on the presentation about this. And I think an annual appropriation is also the right emphasis for that, recognizing that probably there will be a second year of some kind, but by then we should have an idea of what the likely uses of the building or the property are going to be. That's my comment.
Thank you. Any other hands raised online before we return to FinCom members? None? Okay, D, and then Dawn.
Carrie, what happens if this article does not pass at town meeting? The costs associated with it, what will happen there? Who will absorb those? Or
So
what?
if this doesn't pass at town meeting, the building remains with the school, and it would be the responsibility of CPS to cover any costs associated with the building.
Okay, thank you.
Dawn.
Will CPS be continuing to use the Cushing Field?
You know, I'm not sure to what extent they use the field right now, but we are not anticipating any change in use or maintenance of that field. So to the extent that they are using it now, they would likely continue to use it. But I'll take a note on that and make sure I have a more crisp answer.
Okay, yeah, but what I'm thinking, Carrie, is that if it's been a school field and then used by the community on weekends, that sort of thing, but now it's open all the time, then the Parks and Rec will find much more use of it by the community. Mm-hmm. And I just think it would be good to clarify if we're increasing programming and costs at Parks and Rec associated with that, and if we're doing that on a temporary basis or, you know, but just to set clear expectations to Mark's point earlier about anticipating a year to decide what to do with the vacant building.
Yeah.
We have a vacant field as well, I guess, so, yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Any other public input or questions? Hearing none, I think we can hold it there on this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next article on our agenda is Article 29, feasibility of acquiring 2229 Main Street, NMI StarMet site. The material in our packet indicates that no motion is anticipated on this article. Could you?
Yeah, if you could just pull up the slides. Yeah. So again, Article 29, feasibility of acquiring 2229 Main Street. As the chair said, we do not anticipate any motion. Back in 2015, at a special town meeting authorized the select board to acquire this property. Since 2015, private parties and the federal government have entered into a consent decree taking responsibility for and funding the environmental cleanup at the site. 2 town committees have issued reports, one in 2021 and one in 2024, with recommendations on reuse and development of the site by the town. The 2229 Main Street Oversight Committee closely tracks the progress of site cleanup and has done so since 2003. Just recently, the Select Board sent a letter to the US EPA and US DOJ conveying the town's interest in entering into discussions to acquire the site. We do expect that these discussions will take probably more than a year. Our legal counsel will be involved in them. We've estimated that the legal expense for this is probably up to $50,000, and we expect that's something that we can fit within our existing or our fiscal 25 legal appropriation as we're closing out some of the longer-term litigation that has been in front of the town for several years. There's likely also opportunities for some additional grant funding. We've been successful in getting some technical assistance grant funding to do some work at that site, and we think that that's a possibility going forward if that's something that's needed. So after reviewing where we are, we decided that we didn't want to move forward, particularly in light of the fact that we're asking for funding for Peabody School and likely asking for funding for MCI Concord.
Okay. Since there'll be no action on this at town meeting, we can move on to the next article, which is Article 32, betterments for temporary improvements to a private way, Dotton and Dover Streets.
Good evening, Alan Cathcart, Director, Concord Public Works. This article, just a little context. We are looking through Public Works at working with the White Pond neighborhood. On the map here, you can see that is in essence the southeastern shore of White Pond. That neighborhood that you see on the left is entirely composed of private ways. This neighborhood was developed pre-subdivision rules and regulations. There are no HOAs, for this area. So the town established a bylaw in 1996. It would allow the town to support initiatives that would improve or temporary improvements to roads and drainage in the neighborhood. In essence, the town becomes the financing tool, but betterments would be assessed and any borrowing would be paid off by those who receive the improvement. The plan on the right shows the neighborhood or the area of direct impact, direct abutters. Those are properties that abut Darton and part of Dover. Next slide, please. The issue is both road and stormwater management challenges. This is unusual in that historically there was consideration of how to help that neighborhood improve roadways. Those are the obvious problems. What you see on these slides here is that stormwater is actually more of a significant problem in this particular intersection. It causes all sorts of nuisances for the neighborhood. It has impacted adversely the road condition and caused serious deterioration in the immediate area. Next slide. So in essence, the mechanism is the abutters need to petition the Public Works Commission for support and guidance to go through this public process of vetting a proposed, what's the problem? The petitioners have to present a design of some sort with a probable cost estimate, and they can also propose a betterment approach that they think is necessary. The petition was appropriately submitted. The scope of work was vetted within the engineering division, and we saw a probable cost estimate about $83,000. Next slide. The design was fairly basic. It was limited in that whereas the petitioners didn't have total control and ability to do anything more significant than a fairly modest improvement, what you see is the design that was submitted for review. It's in essence a few new catch basins that connect into in essence, think of it as a glorified leaching field, like a septic system, but they're discharge chambers that would be installed under Darton Street. And what they do is they catch the rainwater, they would allow infiltration into the ground. There is no outflow, so they would serve a fairly limited storm, but any significant storm would surcharge and the puddle would reappear. Next slide. The engineering division, we were able to get some support from the town through ARPA funds to look at a more long-term design, something we might do in the public way without the same limitations. We went through a detailed assessment, got a consultant on board, and we sort of created an alternative design. You can see the cost for that is $350,000. That's inclusive of a new stormwater system. I'm sorry, this is, you're not going to be able to make a lot of detail out of here, but the system is is more elaborate. It does include leaching chambers like the original plan, but also a discharge location, so any excessive storm would outfall and not cause ponding. The extent's a little bit more expansive. The cost is significantly more. Next slide. So the Public Works, in keeping with the bylaw, holds a hearing to hear from the petitioners and see, test their interest after it's been more formally vetted. The hearing was just last night. The particular considerations in this situation is that the stormwater contribution is far more significant than the direct abutters. It's actually collecting stormwater from a larger area. So it's introduced an interesting wrinkle into, well, who should be participating in the, an betterment assessment. Legally, we've been advised that only the direct abutters of the property can participate. There are 13 of those. 13 abutters would be assessed a betterment of some term for $350,000. It's fairly significant investment. That's why the mechanism is there. But for town meeting, in order to borrow that money and the town to be sort of the financier, that's why we're coming before you to put this article. As of last night, it was good conversation. I think recognition that this is a larger problem that affects more than just the direct abutters. So the petitioners have offered to continue the hearing. They'll be coming back in May with an understanding of what is their real interest, because at this point the mechanics are the cost of the project would be borne by them, financed through the town, and their decision is pending.
Thank you. Okay. Questions from members of the Finance Committee, and we'll start on this end.
I don't.
So if I understand the warrant article correctly, it is for approval to borrow the $350,000
That is correct.
to be repaid by the abutters.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Given the timeline this is on, will this be sufficiently developed so that there can be a town meeting vote on it?
We have a short period of time to determine that, but it is still a legitimate project until we hear otherwise from the petitioners, but they're contemplating whether they want to proceed with this. We'll know at least by May 14th, possibly beforehand.
Okay, thank you.
I'm wondering if we've ever done something like this before, and if this is a service that the town provides to all private property owners. For example, if someone with a campus like the Middlesex School said, we have a problem with flooding, we'd like the town to engineer it, fix it, and borrow money to do the work, and then we'll pay you back over time. Is that something we're in that business of doing?
No, the bylaw from 1996 is what informs this process. It's very limited, and it's based on a problem that had been identified going back in the 70s for the White Pond neighborhood. So it's limited to the private ways in the White Pond area.
Okay, thank you.
Dee.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious as to the solution that you've come up with, and is that going to solve the problem, or is the problem really bigger than just what is known at this time?
No, the solution the town designed will solve the problem. And again, the problem is not just for the direct abutters, it's for the neighborhood, including the town and access to public trails, the town well. So there's sort of greater interest as well.
Okay, thanks.
I have two questions. On slide 4, it says temporary repairs to the private way. Is that first solution? Isn't that a permanent solution, or what's the?
There are many legal interpretations, but in that neighborhood there was work that was done, including a reclaim, And, that's questionable whether that's temporary or not, but in essence, the mechanism has been followed for, as long as the abutters have been willing to pay, the town's been willing to, support. It's only been enacted twice that I'm aware of, in both fairly small scale, neither involving the same level of stormwater management that's required here.
Gotcha, okay. And the second question I have is actually for the moderator. Does there have to be a max number on the warrant article? Because we have the $83,000 number and the $350 that the town would borrow. So do we have to say a max of $350?
This is 25, right?
32.
32.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, it is 32, thank you. $350,000 is in the warrant article.
Oh, it is in there, okay.
Yes, so it could be, it could vary by as much as 10%.
Thank you. I didn't have the actual warrant, I just saw the numbers here. Thank you.
Is there any way this comes back to the taxpayer, or does it only go forward if the abutters say yes and they start paying interest on the borrowed money immediately?
As it is structured presently, it wouldn't come back to the taxpayer. I do want to note that ARPA funds allowed for the design, and that's basically because the appreciation of the significance of the problem, and it was unusual. So I think it was well spent, and whatever we do here is going to inform future similar projects. And I say we will be back in the White Pond neighborhood, not just for this project, for others, just by the nature of how it was configured.
Don.
Yeah, following up on John's question, the debt would be a general obligation of the town, so it would be the taxpayer's obligation. What's the mechanism, and maybe questions for the assessor, I don't know, of making sure that it's attached to the properties? Only 60% of the abutters signed. How do we know that the taxpayers don't pay the balance of the debt, and how do we, is there a legal mechanism there? I don't know.
It's my understanding it goes on the taxes, and if they don't pay, they're liened.
Yeah, so we can just create that lien?
Okay, going to FinCom members online. Suresh, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to give a shout out to Alan. Thank you for taking the effort to move this forward and have a real design done, because when I saw the first number, I almost fell from the chair that nothing can happen for that price. So I'm glad you went ahead and had a more detailed design and a better estimate. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Suresh. Colin.
Alan, I think I heard you say that the $350,000 would solve the problem and that it would be paid for by the 13 abutters. That would be roughly $27,000 plus the interest per home. What happens if the abutters decide that they don't want to wait and they just want to go ahead and do it, and they're willing to go ahead and put up the money for the betterment? Even though other people will benefit from this, what happens if you get, say, 10 of the abutters saying, yes, let's go ahead and do it? Will you go ahead with this article?
My understanding is they have every legal right to do so. They just, in fact, it may even be a little bit less expensive because they don't have to go through prevailing wage, but it's just difficult to get 13 property owners with different interests and capacity to agree to something like that. That's why we have the bylaw.
Okay, a quick follow-up. Do all 13 abutters have to agree to this for the warrant article to go forward?
No, the procedure is that not less than 60%. So more than 60%, if they agree, the Public Works Commission would work with the finance director in assessing a betterment proportionate to the improvement. In this case, it's both stormwater and the road reconstruction. And once that's adopted, it's the majority rule.
Okay, so that means if 8 homeowners, 8 abutters agree, you go forward with this article.
That's correct. There was a lot of discussion last night, and I think recognition from the neighborhood that they could see a merit of a different model, but it would require a separate, unique petition. We couldn't take action on what was submitted. We'd have to revisit a different petition that would possibly include a larger area, including those who are contributing to the watershed, including potentially those who get indirect benefit of egress. There's the benefit of environmental protection. There's public health issues as far as the ponding water. So I think the neighborhood recognizes the problem is bigger than just the 13 abutters.
Okay. Shri, any questions on your end?
I had a quick question. You said, this $350,000 solution, even with the most severe storm, it will take care of it, or we are still going to have some issues there?
No, the design basis went from a 2-year storm event, which happens fairly frequently, to a 25-year design. And the difference is the 25-year design has an overflow. So any storm event greater than that will surcharge and go into what we found is a catchment area conveniently in the same general area. So it would be more conventional in design.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Public input. Does anybody in the room have any input? Before we get there, one more Finance Committee member question. Don.
Just wondering if the town will be taking on a maintenance obligation here. If we design and construct it, is there any sort of warranty or maintenance obligation on the town's part? Thanks.
No, not as it's presented.
So would the owners accept that responsibility? I guess that implicitly they would, but they'll be calling you, I guess.
No, under the design, yes, and that's where there was discussion on what would it take for the town to accept it, and quite honestly, there's more dialogue that needs to be had, but it's a good ask. Owning and inspecting, maintaining, replacing, improving a stormwater system is not easy, and this system is complex enough where it would be a challenge to be privately managed.
Thanks.
Okay. Public input. Any input or questions here in the room? Seeing none. Anyone online with their hand raised? Okay. I think we can hold it there. Now, for folks in the room who plan to stick around for our deliberation and votes on articles, it is not our intention to deliberate or vote on this one because there is still... Oh, no, I know. I'm just talking about this article specifically. Because it's still in process, it sounds like there are some significant unanswered questions about it. We're not going to deliberate or vote on it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
The last article on the agenda for tonight is Article 47, Community Preservation Recommendation Appropriations. Burton, before you kick off, I skipped over Article 33, and that's because it's our intention to push that to our May 1st hearing, as I mentioned in my introduction. And that's at the request of the town manager, who asked for some additional time to prepare the presentation on that article. So we're not going to take up Article 33 tonight. Burton, thanks.
Thanks very much. Burton Flint, I'm the current chair of the Community Preservation Committee. Mindful that we're a few minutes behind schedule, I will go quickly. So if you want to go to your next slide, please. Article 47 is essentially seeking town meeting approval for funding the 7 projects and 1 reserve fund that the CPC is recommending for funding this year. Next slide. This is a general breakdown of funding by category. So this year, the total funding that we're recommending is $1,554,000. That's across 7 applications, which is a very significant reduction from years prior in terms of the total number of applications, and 1 historic preservation reserve that I'll speak to at the end and why we're doing that. The breakdown by funding, these are generally split about 1/3 open space and recreation together, 1/3 community housing, and 1/3 historic preservation. If you were to look at the historic, over the last 20-some years of CPA funding, this year it's a little more skewed. It's about 50% community housing, about 17% recreation, 17% open space. Historic preservation comes in at a little over 11%. That's actually, I'll explain, we have to fund at least 10%. I'll explain why it came out at 11%. And administration at about 3.2%. Next slide, please. This is a quick list of each of the 7 applications. This will go quicker tonight. Last year we had 19, so this is lickety split. So the first is Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. That is by far and away the largest application. It's a smaller application from the Regional Housing Services Program, something we funded many years now for Concord's contribution to running that office. The Thoreau Elementary School athletic fields, some improvements there. Essentially phase 2 of the Giroux Recreation Area planning. A preservation survey of modern structures and neighborhoods, essentially covering the period from the 1940s up through the early 1970s. And the preservation of 18th century assessor's records that are stored in the basement of the library. And then a small portion for CPC staff and technical support. The final allocation of a little over $100,000 is to fund a reserve fund as we're required under the Concord the Community Preservation Act to meet 10% per of the 3 primary funding categories. Next slide, and I'll go through each one of these specifically. So Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, this is $740,000. But I would point out in the first instance that this year, the Concord Housing Authority, thank you, I'm trying to put in a name to the A, the Concord Housing Authority returned $240,000 in funding to the CPA fund due to funds that were returned, were saved on their Commonwealth Ave project. So essentially they were coming and asking for $500,000 and the new funding, and that $240,000 that was returned continue to be dedicated to housing. This is not for any one particular project, but this is to fund the trust so that the trust can then designate which projects should be considered. Next slide. This is a regional housing services program. Many of you are probably familiar with this. We've been funding it for years. This is Concord's contribution for a multi-town office that helps apply for grants, manage housing programs and the like. It is a tremendous return on our investment. This year it is higher because the head of the office is retiring and wants to bring on a new person to take over her role, and there will be some significant overlap in time, which the committee thought was a pretty prudent use of funds, but it is a bump up for this year. Next slide. This is a Thoreau Elementary School athletic fields and green space. So there's been, with the temporary school buildings that were there and then that have now been removed, there's the Concord School Committee is looking at rejuvenating the fields. There's a significant capital fundraising campaign that's going on at the school that would supplement this funding. This is so $444,000 for essentially most of the stuff that's in the blue on this slide, the athletic fields that are used by the school and town soccer and other groups in the neighborhood. The funding that the school is doing separately is funding new playground facilities that are, I believe, the green on the slide. Next slide, please. Giroux Recreation Area is finally sort of stage 1 has come to a very nice close. This is stage 2. The phase 1 planning really happened, I mean, it's a very long time ago now, before White Pond, for example, was donated to the town. Originally, the phase 1 anticipated waterfront access, and that kind of changed with White Pond coming, and this is to now get actual access to the water, ADA accessible, looking at a ADA canoe launch, and also coming up with a long-term plan for maintenance and capital replacement at the Giroux Recreation Area. Next slide. This is a preservation survey of modern structures. The last time a preservation survey was done was in the early 90s. The survey looks at essentially buildings that were built 50 years prior, and that's in part driven by the fact that the demolition delay bylaw applies to buildings that are at least 50 years old. So we haven't done one of those now in almost my lifetime, which is 50 years. Well, since the 90s, sorry. We don't have one that covers, this one will cover buildings back to the early 70s. That's my lifetime. And so that is actually about 2/3 of the buildings in Concord, because of obviously a lot of the buildings built in the post-war period. But we cover things like the Conantum neighborhood and the deck homes. There's a lot of modern, very worthy of preservation structures that have been built in that time. And so if somebody were looking, if the town needed to see whether something should be on the demolition delay list, it's difficult now without having that survey. Next slide. This is to preserve, some assessor's records going back to the 18th century that are currently preserved in the library. They're in various states of repair. These were actively used documents in the assessor's office, flipped through. They're very interesting historical records showing the residents of Concord and what they owned, including what people they owned, and the land and their livestock and the like. These records are becoming of increasing public interest, given people who are doing contemporary research on enslaved people and also with the 250th celebration, people looking back through these records. Next slide. This is an annual request for CPC staff funding and support. It's a little bit larger and increasing. I think the increases that we see here are generally the town recognizing the expenses that have been covered sort of through overhead that are really truly attributable to the CPC, legal expenses, copying, the staff time, which is significant, and so forth. Next slide. So this year, the historic preservation applications we received came to a little over $80,000. We're obligated to spend at least 10%, spend or reserve at least 10% of the allocable funds in a given year to each of three primary categories, being historic preservation, open space, and community housing. Those are the categories in the Act. The number we used to get at 10% is $1,859,000. That's the total of the property tax surcharge plus the state match for the year. So it's not 10% of the amount we're recommending for funding, but it's the total amount that's newly raised for fiscal year 2026, which is about $1.8 million. And that is everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from Finance Committee members, starting on that end of the table. Everybody good? Don.
Thank you, Barton. My question is about the Giroux Recreation Area. Given the process underway to determine the future of the pond, is it wise to move forward right now with I think you said a handicapped accessible canoe launch?
Yeah, that was probably my first question when we did our site visit and discussed this with the applicant. I've been following this very closely for a long time, including the discussion around the fate of the pond. I think under all of the alternatives that are being considered for Giroux Pond, there would remain water, essentially a body of water, immediately in front of the Giroux Recreation Area. It could be, now it could be, if it stayed the same, it would be boat access to a very shallow pond that's relatively large, and if in the future it would be boat access to a small pond, but then access to the Neshoba Brook.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy? Good. Lindsay? Paul? Online, any questions from Finance Committee members?
No.
Okay. Here in the room, any public input or questions?
I do. Hi, my name is Mary Hartman, 16 Concord Green, Chair of the Select Board, speaking on my own behalf. Thank you, Burton. I'm always delighted to see the thoroughness of the CPCs. I wish the town did that for all of our spending, but you do a great job. I have a question and a comment or suggestion. My suggestion is for the Thoreau money, the $445,000 that we're spending, for Thoreau, will that field and those lands be available for to the town, given that we're spending town money? So what reassurance do we have that those funds will be spent in a way that improves the enjoyment of that land for all taxpayers? And my second comment is, you mentioned the reserves, and it might be a good idea for us to see all the reserves that you have when you put your slide up, because you mentioned reserves just casually as far as having to build it up to meet your 10% for historic preservation, but just getting a feel for what we have in reserves I think would be helpful. So question, comment.
Thank you very much, Mary. So first of all, yeah, we did get assurances from the school that existing use of that field and in coordination with youth soccer and the like would continue to be available, and they coordinate that for hours outside school hours. And apparently there's pretty heavy programming on that, and that was part of their application. I could speak more to that. With respect to reserves, just to touch on that, because I think it's a great thing, and we need I think people need to know more about our reserves. So we have, this would create a historic preservation reserve. So we've got undesignated reserves and then designated reserves. We have rolling forward for a couple of years at least, open space reserve of $250,000. Historically, the committee tended to put money into that reserve because that goes to land purchases really, which tend to be big, lumpy purchases. And then this would add, I think it was $103,000 to historic preservation by necessity. Our undesignated reserves right now are, well, after this funding cycle would be about do the math, just around $1 million. So the last 2 years, the applications have been we've been undersubscribed. We've had more surcharge and state match than application numbers. So we kind of have a pretty large amount sitting in the bank at the CPC. And so I think getting the more people that can know about that, the better. Maybe we would see an uptick in applications from both the town and other groups. And so I'll add that.
Yes.
Keith Bergman, 56 White Avenue, Chair of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. And first, thank you to the town of Concord, to the Community Preservation Committee, and over the years to the Finance Committee as well for supporting funds for the trust for affordable housing. And we still have work to do. That, as you may know, that the subsidized housing inventory today stands at 16.12%. That means that 16.12% of the town's total year-round housing stock is countable, underline countable, on the subsidized housing inventory, but only 7.2% of the housing stock is affordable, capital A, affordable, deed restricted. The reason for that anomaly is because for a 40B, for a rental 40B, for every one affordable unit, there are 3 market rate units. So while the 2 40Bs are adding over 400 units, only 100 or so will be affordable. And in fact, this time next week, our subsidized housing inventory will be at 13% when the 200 units for the Novo 40B fall off temporarily because they only have 1 year to pull their building permit, and stay on the SHI. The hope is that they, when that project then proceeds, they pull a building permit and they come back, but we'll be off for a short period of time. The funding over time has been, we've received $4.5 million from town meeting, and we're grateful for that. We received $500,000 in town ARPA funds this past December. Appreciate that. And we've earned over $150,000 in interest income during the time that the trust has been in existence. We see ahead that the town is embarking on 2 once-in-a-generation opportunities where there will likely be some housing, MCI Concord and the land use matrix process. Our goal is to make sure that some of that is affordable, and we want to have the trust funds there to be able to leverage that. So thanks for your support, Town of Concord.
Hi, good evening. Cameron McKenna, I'm 64 Nut Meadow Crossing. I am a member of the Select Board, speaking on my own behalf. So I wanted to just maybe ask a procedural question. So thank you for the presentation, and very clear, and some great projects there. I know this is what the CPC is recommending. I know also that one of the things that was debated a lot was this amenities building, right? So it's just a procedural question here tonight, which is if at the town meeting, the town said, hey, that is something that we would want from the CPC funds. Is there anything from the CPC bylaws or Massachusetts 44B that would preclude an amendment to this warrant article if that was something that people were interested in?
My understanding, and maybe ask the town moderator to weigh in, but I believe that the funding amounts can be reduced but not increased.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to resume the regular meeting of the Finance Committee. We never actually adjourned the meeting itself. We adjourned the public hearing, so we're good to go. And what we're going to do now is move on to agenda item 4, which is to discuss and potentially vote on the articles we heard during the public hearing. And we'll follow the same order, starting with Article 17, the Minuteman Regional Technical School District budget. And I'll open it up for discussion.
I move affirmative action.
Discussion of the motion.
I think you need a second to that motion, and I will second that motion.
I did second it.
D seconded.
I can't hear who's doing what from this perspective. Sorry about that.
And the motion is to recommend affirmative action of the article. If no discussion, we're ready to proceed to a roll call vote.
Suresh Bhatia. He's dropped off. Peggy Briggs.
Aye.
Kathy Cuoklo.
Aye.
Eric Dahlberg.
Yes.
John Garofalo.
Yes.
Pat Geyer. She's not here. Greg Gariello.
Yes.
Don Kupka, I vote yes. Lindsay Liss.
Yes.
Dee Ortner.
Yes.
Carolyn Reed.
Yes.
Paul Rodriguez.
Yes.
Kazi Zadruzaman, don't believe he's here. And Lois Wassel.
Yes.
So the motion
What about
passes.
Shri?
Oh,
I didn't
Shri,
get called.
sorry, Shri Tupel.
And Suresh is back online.
Okay. So Shri, I'm sorry, what was your vote?
Yes.
And Suresh
Yes.
Bhatia? Yes, okay.
Unanimous.
That was
So-
unanimous.
Unanimous, yes.
Okay. Next article is Article 22, Retirement Board Stipends. I'll open it up for discussion. Peggy.
I can't really warm up to this. I think it's hard for me to warm up to one board or committee having a stipend when there are so many boards and committees that do not. And if I was convinced they put in more hours than we do, or the select board, or had more personal responsibility, had to sign a personal bond, or, put a lien on their children or something, I'd feel differently, but I can't really warm up to it.
Other thoughts? John?
I think that gives me pause is just the amount, right? It is nominal, but it doesn't seem to be enough to convince people to do or not do that, be a part of this position. If you're not willing to divulge all your assets and liabilities, is $3,000 going to say you're really going to do that? And if someone is only going to come over here because they get paid $3 or $4,000, is that the person you want as a volunteer? So if you told me they were getting paid $30,000 a year and had real financial analysis behind them, it would be different. Just seems like a weird way to take money when I think Peggy said others don't. I just kind of confused about it.
Other thoughts? Kathy?
I find it odd. And I think Peggy just said, there's so many boards here in town and so much work that gets done. I just find it odd.
But I would say that this is the only one where there's a law put into place, right, in 2011 that established that this could be, that a stipend could be paid. So there's something different here than the other types of boards that folks are volunteering for. And then 70% of boards are paying this, right? So I don't know if it's appropriate to compare this to other volunteer responsibilities.
Paul?
I look at this in a little different than most of the people on the board. On the finance committee, I look at this as opportunity cost of not having people that want to do this work. The current board has suggested they're having recruitment issues, that they're going to be using money that would be allocated for other costs, because there are other costs associated with running the pension, with management people, with accountants, and the like. A majority of people who are in similar situations receive these stipends. So there must be a reason why that happens, and it doesn't cost us anything. They're asking to use their money to recruit people that have a certain skill set. I think it should be done.
Lois and then Dawn.
I think that's an important point that Paul is making. It's not their money, it's the retirement fund's money, but it isn't the town's money. It isn't money that would otherwise be available to the town for other purposes. I'm out of the investment earnings of that retirement fund. I'm sure there are professionals that are being paid at a much higher level than the board is asking to be paid. I know it's a little odd for all of us because we all do this on a volunteer basis, and we work with other committee members and select board members who are working very long hours and really sacrificing a lot of their time and energy to do things for the town. But there must be a reason why this particular function was treated differently by the legislature. So I can see an argument for doing it in this particular circumstance, and I don't think it generalizes to the other volunteer work that we do.
Don?
Yeah, a little like Lois's comment, I think it'd almost be better if the beneficiaries of the retirement board voted on this, because it's really their money, it is their money. I equate it to endowments for trustees of schools and things who have endowments, that they oversee the fund managers, and they select them and oversee them. And they're all volunteer, to my knowledge. I don't know why the state decided to put some funds in this. It almost poisons the pool, because now I question the worth of a member who would choose to do it only if there's a compensation and wouldn't do it otherwise. Whereas usually you have an alum, a board of trustees who not only volunteer their time, but actually make donations, in the other instances where there are private foundations and institutions that have similar oversight with responsibilities. So it's an oddball situation. I think the state created that situation, and I could see why it puts ours at a little bit of a disadvantage to not be doing it. However, we're often on the out, a little bit unusual, and it just. I was thinking during the presentation that if somebody would do it only if they were paid to do it, that would almost disqualify them from serving in that capacity. So it's an odd thing.
It's, for other committees, I would think of it as comparable to the trustees of town donations, which I think are more directly responsible for that fund, and they obviously don't get a stipend.
Greg.
So I have one comment. I was just looking online real quick for it. And in the presentation, it said 44% received the maximum, right? And if you look online, I'm going to take a quick guess. 80% at least get the minimum. Do you know that? Do you know that number by any chance? That 80% of towns actually offer the minimum to the retirement boards. So what was presented, I think, was the maximum number of 45. There's a whole slew of towns that say yes to the 3,000. So I think it's a small amount to provide opportunity. I don't think everybody's saying if they're going to do it just because of that. I don't think that is a valid answer. I know sometimes if I had something and someone was like, hey, here's a little benefit to it, it might sway me that way even though I was going to do it. Right, so I think there's two things here. Is it's a little bit higher, and Concord is a big no on the board. I can send this to Eric so everybody else can view it at some point. But it's just another one of those things where Concord is sort of on the no side of things rather than with everybody on the yes side of things.
Okay, Colin, I see you have your hand up online.
Yeah, this is one that I was assigned to. I've watched the retirement board for the last 4 or 5 years during their deliberations. These people plus the folks who preceded them as well. And they do have a heightened level of expertise. We have the chief financial officer is a member. The town accountant is a member. Our deputy fire chief is a member. And the two people who appeared before you are the citizens. Mr. Macy is in the financial industry, and when I watch him in particular talk to the financial advisors, they're talking one-on-one. So it's a volunteer board to some degree. There's one of them, it has to be there as an ex officio member. But they're doing a really good job, and they're trying to manage this $240+ million fund, which is more than our town budget. It's not a lot of money. It is coming from the retirement. I kind of feel like, right, so yes, it does raise the question about, will this encourage other board members to seek compensation? But I don't know of another board or committee that has mandatory education requirements. Even if the fees are reimbursed, you still have to take the time off from your job to go there. So that's one of the aspects that I'm impressed with this. So well, I guess I'll have to vote on this. I'd be supporting it for that reason.
Okay.
Eric, can I just, real quick, just correct myself? It was on the slide, the first bullet there that said 71% of all boards. So I gave a little higher, but I missed it when I was reading it quickly.
Okay.
And I just wanted to make one comment that I don't really like the idea of making a moral judgment on people for wanting to accept a stipend for work that is being done. So, and I think this is nominal, and if this helps with the recruitment of high quality folks, and I don't want to make a moral judgment about if that's a bad thing that they'd want a stipend. I think it's nominal, and if it's going to help with recruiting, like Carlin just said, this is a massive amount of pension assets, and you kind of want them to be in the best hands. So I'll be voting affirmative for this.
Anyone else? My own position, I commend the presenters, Eric and Peter. I thought it probably puts you in a bit of an awkward position to have to defend this since you serve on the board itself. The presenters personally volunteered not to take the stipend, which I think is commendable. That being said, I personally, I don't support this, and part of the reason for that is the timing. Given where we're at with the bigger picture economic climate and just I'll leave it at that. I don't think the timing is appropriate to do something like this.
So we should have take a vote?
I'll entertain a motion.
I motion to vote. I don't know what affirmative, right?
So Paul is making a motion to recommend affirmative action of the
Yes.
article. Okay.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
Who was
Greg
that?
seconds.
Greg.
Thank you.
Discussion of the motion to recommend affirmative action. Hearing none, we can proceed to a vote.
Suresh Bhatia,
Yes.
Peggy Briggs,
Yes.
You're recommending affirmative action?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Kathy Quoklo,
No.
What was that vote? Was that a no? Couldn't hear it, Kathy.
Eric Dahlberg.
Did you catch Kathy's vote?
No. I
Kathy
didn't
was
get
no.
it.
Yes. Yep.
I'm a no.
John Garofalo,
Abstain.
Pat Geyer is not here. Greg Gariello,
Yes.
Don Kupka, voting yes. Lindsay Less,
Yes.
Dee Ortner,
No.
Carlin Reed,
Yes.
Paul Rodriguez,
Yes.
Kazi Sadruzaman, Sri Tupel,
Yes.
Lois Wassoff.
Yes.
Don, what vote do you count here?
So I have 9 affirmative, 3 noes, and 1 abstention.
I've got 9 yes.
Carlin, does that agree with your count?
I have 9 yes, 3 no's, and 1 abstention.
Yeah, same, okay. Okay, so the
9-3-1.
motion passes to recommend affirmative action on Article 22.
Okay. Thank you. Article 23, Acceptance of the HERO Act. Discussion.
I can make a comment. I think there are actually probably more veterans than she envisions, but I don't think the number is going to be overwhelming for the amount of money that is authorized under the Act. I think it's a good idea. I'll say I will vote affirmative.
Dawn.
The funds come from the overlay account, and I don't have a sense of where that money comes from or how much is in there. Anybody know?
Yes, $500,000.
500,000 in the projection for 2026. Yeah. And for every year in the 5-year projection.
It's the fund that the assessors, Board of Assessors keeps to cover abatements.
Okay.
And there's always, historically,
Right.
there has been excess there. We rated it once to supplement the middle school stabilization fund. Well, but let me rephrase.
We moved it to the.
We
Use the same word. We talked to them and.
Right, what I meant to say was that there was a vote at town meeting to use some money from that stabilization fund and move it into the.
No,
middle
from the
school-
overlay account.
From the overlay fund and move it into the stabilization fund. So I misspoke, but the effect was the same. So that's the fund that it'll come to.
Okay. And then the other,
And that makes sense, because it is a tax abatement.
right,
Yeah.
it
Right,
does.
that's
yeah.
exactly what it is. That's
Paul,
what it's intended for.
I hear your point. I was surprised there aren't more, but I think she said that it requires that they are at least 10% disabled from
Yeah,
exercise.
I don't know very many people who have done the paperwork that have spent a good amount of time in the military that don't achieve the 10%
I see.
mark. But the overall amount, it caps at like $750. So even if it were a multiple of the number that was quoted today, the materialness of the amount is minimal.
Any other points?
Yeah, I
Peggy.
would just, I'm in favor of this. I would just also point out that this is following a law that was passed in 2024, so that's a good reason to, stay up to date. We're always looking for ways to help out our citizens in need when it comes to taxes, and this is a pretty minimal effort.
Although
Okay.
not all disabled veterans are in need.
Right.
Just to make that point.
Yeah, this isn't a needs-based.
Yeah, this is more honoring, a sacrifice for the country as opposed to a needs-based
Right.
issue.
But
And to be perfectly upfront, I'm a veteran. I served in the Coast Guard for 20 years, so I don't plan on asking for this assessment, but I find myself not in that needs-based category.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I
think
move
we're at that point.
affirmative action on Article 23.
I second.
Seconded by, well, I think Lois got in there first.
Yeah. All right.
Any discussion on the motion to recommend affirmative action? Hearing none, we can proceed to a roll call.
Suresh Bhatia,
Yes.
Peggy Briggs,
Aye.
Kathy Kwokolo,
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg,
Yes.
John Garofalo,
Yes.
Pat Geyer's not here, Greg Gariello,
Yes.
I'm Don Kupke, yes. Lindsay Liss,
Yes.
Dee Ortner,
Yes.
Carlin Reed,
Yes.
Paul Rodriguez,
Yes.
Kazi Sadruzman is not here, Sri Tupel,
Yes.
and Lois Wassoff.
Yes.
Okay, the vote passes unanimously. The motion passes unanimously.
Okay,
Can I just, sorry, a point. On the retirement board stipend, we voted affirmative action. Did we vote at the $4,500 number, or did we vote at it, or did we pick a different number?
It's
They
a
said,
warrant article.
So we stay with the warrant article? Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
all right.
Okay.
Thank you.
The next article is Article 25, Transfer of Peabody School and Appropriate Funds. Discussion.
This is a can of worms.
It seems to me that, we have to preserve the assets of the town, and with all of the various studies of the properties and the special committee that's just been formed, I think that I would support this as a way to take care of that property until such time as its final disposition is determined.
Other points? Don?
I think given where we are, I agree that we can't be irresponsible But I think that it is it bothers me a lot that there wasn't a disposition plan, because this is not a surprise that this school is empty. And it's not and it's an open-ended, it's a one-year ask, but we'll be back here next year with another ask, and then the next year another ask. And it feels as though it's money that is wasted.
The chair of the special committee did chime in online and said that it would probably be 2 years.
Yeah, that's right. And that's not responsible. So I think we'd be irresponsible to not approve this, but I think the town would be irresponsible to just let it sit unresolved, or to move town employees in, it just as an expansion of facilities when we don't, without giving something up and finding offsetting savings. And I know it's hard to accession property, because we tend to hoard it or hold on to it, and because it's hard to find. However, the town doesn't have the funds or the budget to expand. I was hoping that this would be sold and the money would be used to reduce the debt from the new middle school construction, but that's not the direction. So that's my 2 cents.
John, and then Suresh online.
Yeah, I think the town and the select board has gone about this in a really poor manner, and I think this is super sneaky. If there was a way to amend this to approve the transfer of the Peabody School but not approve the $100,000, I'd vote for that all day long, because it's open-ended. They don't have a plan. They should be accepting bids and then evaluating the bids to figure out what's best. Otherwise, they can say the committee could come up with anything they want, but if there's no developer to do that, it's a moot, total waste of time and taxpayer money. And I think we should force the town to eat the $100,000 for delaying this process. I'm not sure what the process is, if we can even do that, but that's my 2 cents. I think they have us in a bind, because if you vote no, it stays at the school committee, and then the town can't do anything with it. So the way this is written, we really don't have any choice but to vote yes if we want to at some point offload it. And so I think it's a super sneaky way they did this. And if we can split it, I'd be all for it.
Suresh online, and then back to Lindsay and Paul here in the room.
I agree with John and Don what they said. Though I'll support the article. I just feel if this was known for so long, CPS or the school administration should have started planning this years ago. And I would hope for that for the next project that we're talking about, maybe a public safety building, we start talking about the disposal at the same time and see what we're going to do with the, as we get done, not wait till the last minute and say, okay, we need now money to just, keep the building safe. Yes, we want to preserve the building, or at least preserve the asset and make the best use of it, but not wait till, the sky is falling apart.
Thank you, Suresh. Lindsay.
Yeah, I had about the same comment as Suresh. As we're thinking about these other capital projects coming up, this needs to be one of the first questions we ask. And I just had a question for us. Did we know that this was coming at all, or was this a surprise with the warrant? Or was this previewed to us at all, that this was going to be handled outside of both the town budget and the school budget?
I think the answer is yes. This has come up at other meetings recently.
When we talked about
I can't
When
hear
we've
you guys
talked
down
about
here.
the middle school, for the past 2 years, it's been said that this building would revert to the town.
Yes, but it's only more recently than that we've been hearing about the cost of maintaining the building safely once the transfer is made, and who's going to absorb that. So, I hear the frustration, and I share it, that we're kind of getting hit by the train we saw coming.
Because this is an operating cost.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons we're seeing it as a separate item at town meeting, and I don't think Carrie buried the lead on this, I think she was clear with us. The town, in responding to our guideline, did some serious, the town feels that it's operating very close to the vest, that they have already made a lot of adjustments, and there's no room to absorb this. So they're dealing with it as a separate article. It is a separate and discrete expense, and it may go away more quickly. We can be optimistic. There could be decisions made during the next year that lower the cost or that define the future more clearly. So this won't necessarily be an ongoing cost. It's a little frustrating that we're here, but it's a valuable piece of property, and it needs to be preserved and kept safe. It's something we need to do for the town to make sure that the value in that property is realized. And it's not crazy to take some time to do some planning to make sure it's being done right. So my inclination is, I mean, I share the frustration I'm hearing, but I'm going to vote yes on this.
Paul? Yeah, I completely agree with that sentiment that they're asking for basically 1 year of funding to come up with a plan to figure out what they are going to do with this building and then speak to that, whether it's in their budget or what have you. I don't think asking for a small amount of money to keep the building safe so they're not having to repair damage that could be caused in the meantime is too big of an ask. And I spoke to it during the discussion that it's not just the building, the property transfer includes the fields, which are popular, and a passionate item among many of people who live in this town. So looking at the property holistically, if they're asking a little bit of money to save the building or keep the building safe while the whole property is transferred, is not a bad decision.
Yeah. And also, it's not just the
Lois,
physical integrity.
can you speak up?
It's not just the physical integrity of the building, it's also potential liability.
Absolutely.
So we have to, in a vacant building, a lot of things can go wrong in a vacant building.
Absolutely.
Don?
Yeah, Paul, I would agree with that if there was a process. There isn't even a process to determine. So you said to keep it safe while they figure out what to do, but there is no timeline, there's no sense.
That's
of-
not fair.
set up a
Because
committee.
it can't be separate from the special committee. Kerry can't be making a plan for that building because it's now been given over to the special committee. The land use committee has to make a determination on all the.
Well, the land use committee is making decisions on MCI Concord, which is not even in our ownership, right? 2229, which we may or may not acquire.
And this.
And this.
And
this.
Peabody, yes,
This
absolutely.
This is made part of the land use task force charge by the select board.
Okay.
Yeah, and to speak, they're asking for 1 year's worth of money to look at the situation that doesn't have, that we're not authorizing a tail here. So if they do come up with a use for this building, then, they'll have to speak to that in their future budget request, which is subject to guideline.
So you're saying, well, 1 year outside of guidelines, and then after that, it'd be subject to guidelines?
Well, that's all they're asking for,
Right.
right?
Yeah, note to self, I agree with that.
Yeah. Just remember that we closed this building because it needed so much money, right? So if that's a real issue here, yeah.
And it feels a little precedent-setting, approving operating expenses, use of cash for operating expenses that, that should have, I think, been part of the guideline process.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's my own position on this. I do not support using free cash for this, given the bigger picture economic situation we're in, or about to be in.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Whose guideline? Whose guideline should this be in?
Well, it should have been considered as part of the guideline process. I think that would have been a discussion.
As to whose?
But as to whose, though? Because if it's necessarily for the property to be transferred, would you put it in the school's guideline or the town's guideline?
I think we would have factored it in for the overall tax increase that we expect for the town and figured out what should the guideline be, knowing that this expense is part of the operating expenses that we as an overall tax-paying, town have to handle.
And Paul, to answer your question, it would have been in the school's guideline, and then that money would have been transferred to the town with the property.
Okay.
Any other points? Online? Okay.
I
I'll
move
entertain a motion.
affirmative action on Article 25.
Peggy moves to recommend affirmative action on Article 25.
I second.
Paul seconds. Discussion of the motion to recommend affirmative action.
I'd just like to make one statement, which is I think there's a lack of clarity in terms of what is going to happen in the next year, even if a committee is formed, which they say they're doing, the town is saying they're doing. And without having clarity on this article, I find myself to be in a situation where I'm going to abstain.
Kathy.
I have a question for the committee. If we vote not to recommend, what happens? What's the process? What will happen? How will the
So that's
how-
what the town answer that, right? It goes to town vote, right? Our recommendation is not binding yet, right? If town says no, then it comes out of their operating budget and they're 100 grand down.
Right.
That's what she said.
If it goes.
No, I thought she said it will be transferred to the schools, right?
No, if we.
What's that?
It will be transferred to the schools, I
Yeah,
thought.
if it's a no, there's no transfer of the property. That's why
At the end
they
of the
bundled these
first
two
year.
together, which is why it's super sneaky,
Then it goes.
right?
There's a hand raised.
Colin, you have your hand up online.
Yes, I'm going to suggest that we reserve the negative comments for our commentary, not on the actual vote, but the commentary that will accompany the vote. That way we can express our displeasure at the process, but actually still go forward and allow the transfer of the property.
Can I just comment that as the last 5 years, more than that, the whole middle school discussion, et cetera, I think the town was pretty happy to find out that the school committee was, even if it's a bit of a Trojan horse, was transferring the Peabody land to the town and not trying to keep it for, their own profit. And I think many people in town still believe that this will be a financial benefit to the town at some point and somehow. So we're glad to have it, but for the short term, it's a bit of a Trojan horse.
Can we finish up on what actually happens? Anthony, I started to hear you comment in there, what happens if it was a no at town meeting? What, so I'd like Anthony.
This article, first of all, is the transfer and then the allocation of the $100,000 to pay for expenses. So it could transfer without having the appropriation, but that means the town would have to come up with.
Yeah, so let's say somebody amends it with a zero balance. So the transfer happens, the 100 grand, then the town has to basically come out of their budget that 100 grand, right?
We'd have to make cuts somewhere to cover that 100,000.
Right, so we would basically be forcing the town to take a cut. Thank you.
And if that were to happen, would the town be inclined to move as quickly as possible to stop the bleeding?
I can't speak for the select board.
All right. Because I think, what if it were to sell for $1 million to a developer and we've just spent 10% of it thinking about it? That's kind of where my mind is on this. But even just for the benefit of everyone here, vacant buildings are where crimes happen. There could be arson, there could be worse that takes place, and the town has liability for. And so I think accepting that we're going to spend $100,000 for the year while that we figure it out means we're accepting the risk that somebody gets badly injured in there, and the town is liable.
But that's true.
But
That's true of any of our buildings.
Well, vacant buildings in particular.
But Don, in your scenario, if we sell it in a month, we're not spending the full 100 grand. so we would get that money back, right? Because of insurance, we wouldn't be spending the full year of that money.
Absolutely, Greg.
So it's not, we wouldn't be spending it if we turn it over in a month, right? So,
Absolutely, but that's why I was asking that of the town.
Yeah.
Is there a process, a timeline? No, the answer was no, though. And it-
No, the
you know,
answer is yes. We
the
said
answer is yes, it's for this year.
There
And
is a
if they have it
committee, and
next
there
year,
is
it's
a-
going to be
there-
in their operating budget. That's what I heard.
Right, and there is a committee, and the committee has a charge, and I believe they're in the process of getting set up. And I don't know what their timeline, whether it's 1 year or not, but there is a, not to quote, but there's a plan to have a plan.
Okay, thanks. All right, that sounds about right. Thanks.
So Dawn, I hear you saying, sell it, but the town, and the town manager in particular, doesn't have that authority, because the select board has given this to a committee.
I appreciate that. I think we all, though, need to accept that with this comes that
I didn't
liability.
hear the question.
So, yeah, okay.
No?
I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Okay, we have a motion that's been seconded.
Right.
The motion is to recommend affirmative action.
Right, so Peggy moved to recommend affirmative action on Article 25. Paul seconded the motion. Should we move to a vote? Okay. Suresh Bhatia?
Yes.
Suresh, I see your hand was raised. Did you intend?
All
No?
set.
Okay, thanks. Suresh is a yes. Peggy Briggs?
Aye.
Kathy Quokolo?
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg?
No.
John Garofalo?
Abstain.
Pat Geyer's not here. Greg Gariella?
Yes.
I'm Don Kupka. I'm a no. Lindsay Liss?
No.
No. Dee Ortner?
Abstain.
Carlin Reed?
Yes.
Paul Rodriguez?
Yes.
Quasi Sadruzman is not here. Sri Tupel?
No.
And Lois Wassoff?
Yes.
So the vote is 7 yes, 4 no, and 2 abstentions. So it passes.
Okay.
4, 5, 6, yes. Who do you have zeros and yes?
Okay.
Is
Carlin's talking, but.
is Carlin time?
Hold on, let's get the, Don, I'm not sure I agree with Ken. I've got 6 yes.
Carlin, you keep going in and out. Can you speak?
Sorry,
clearly?
it's, yeah, Chicago, what can I say? I've got 6 yeses.
I'm sorry, you have 6 yeses?
Yeah, I've just 6 of them. Who do you have as the 7th one?
I can't hear you. Sorry.
Who do you
Okay.
have for who do you have for?
Turn sideways, you can't hear it.
Read off the yeses. Just read off the, Don, read off the
Oh,
yeses.
I was making hash marks.
Okay, here's what I have. Suresh, yes. Peggy, yes. Kathy, no.
No,
Eric,
yes.
Kathy's a yes.
There it is.
okay, that's cool. All right, so that was 7 yes, 4 no, 2 abstentions.
Yeah.
Yes,
7, 4, 2.
that's correct. That's what I.
Yeah, I'll just observe, you agree on the outcome, but it sounds like you didn't quite catch the audio of every single vote, Colin, so I think we're all in sync that the motion passed. We can review the tape to get the roll call exactly right.
Got it.
Okay. Article 29, feasibility of acquiring 2229 Main Street. No motion on that one. Article 32, betterments for temporary improvements to a private way. We agreed we're not going to deliberate or vote on that one tonight, given the unanswered questions that we hope to have resolved in time for our, we don't have a specific date in mind, but we hope to have them resolved ahead of town meeting. Article 33, MCI Concord Planning. That one is going to be heard on May the 1st, so no action on that tonight. So the last article for our deliberation and vote tonight is Article 47, CPC recommendation. Discussion on Article 47.
I move affirmative action on Article 47.
Second.
D seconds. Discussion of the motion to recommend affirmative action.
I think the committee does a very good job of going through all of the applications, visiting the sites, and making their evaluations, so I am supporting affirmative action.
Other points? Okay, I think we're ready for a vote.
Okay. Suresh Bhatia.
Aye.
Peggy Briggs.
Aye.
Kathy Kwoklo.
Yes.
Eric Dahlberg.
Yes.
John Garofalo.
Yes.
Greg Gariello.
Yes.
Don Kupka, I'm a yes. Lindsay Liss.
Yes.
Dee Ortner.
Yes.
Carlin Reed.
Yes.
Paul Rodriguez.
Yes.
Sri Tupel.
Yes.
And Lois Wassoff.
Yes.
So that's unanimous and it passes.
Great. Okay, thank you all. That wraps up our deliberations and votes on the articles heard tonight. The next item on our agenda is item number 5, correspondence. We did have several pieces of correspondence in the packets. My read of them is that no action is necessary, but I open it up to the group for discussion.
I agree with your read of it.
Okay. Anyone else on correspondence? Okay, thank you, Anthony, for getting that packaged up for us. Item number 6, minutes. We have one set of minutes for review and approval. Those are the minutes of our previous meeting, March 27th.
Vote to approve the minutes of the March, what,
27th.
27th meeting.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Greg. Discussion of the motion to approve.
Excellent minutes.
Anyone else? Okay, we're ready to vote.
Okay. Suresh Bhatia.
Aye.
Peggy Briggs.
Aye.
Kathy Kwoklo. Eric Dahlberg.
Yes.
John Garofalo.
Yes.
Greg Gariello.
Yes.
I'm Don Kupka, I'm a yes. Lindsay Liss.
Yes.
Dee Ortner.
Yes.
Carlin Reed.
Yes.
Paul Rodriguez.
Yes.
He's not here. Sri Tupel.
Yes.
And Lois Wassoff.
Yes.
So would vote pass.
Thank
the
you,
motion
folks.
passes unanimous vote. I'm sorry?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you to Colin and Dawn for getting the minutes turned around so quickly. I think that's one of our sleeper accomplishments this year. The minutes have been totally drama-free this year.
They get a round of
It's a big
applause.
deal. It's really a big deal having
Carolyn.
excellent minutes in a timely manner.
It's Carlin.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Okay, our last item is anticipated adjournment. Before we adjourn, just taking a quick look at our next meeting. We have our second public hearing on Tuesday the 15th. Note that it's a Tuesday. We typically don't meet on Tuesdays. Tuesday the 15th at 7 p.m., same room. That one is very likely going to be a very, very long session. We have over a dozen articles on the agenda, including the 3 big budget articles. So next Tuesday will be very long.
And what time do we start next Tuesday?
We start at 7, which is,
Okay.
I know, later than we typically start. That is set by the bigger picture town meeting schedule.
Okay. Thank you.
So we have public hearing number 2 next Tuesday. We have a regular meeting on Thursday, April 24th. Okay? And then we have our third and final public hearing on Thursday, May 1st. So busy couple of weeks.
And we do plan on voting for, like, next Tuesday for doing the same thing we did tonight, do it all on that night. Okay.
That's right. That's right. As long as we feel that we have the information we need, the plan is to vote on the articles we hear later that night.
Okay.
Okay? I will observe, we talked about this previously, I'll observe that our last hearing on May the 1st, we have a very quick turnaround on our recommendations because the final draft of our report, it has to be 100% done, is due on May the 5th. So realistically, we've got to get everything packaged up and 100% finalized right after that meeting.
And that meeting, that hearing is the enterprise funds.
That's right.
Yeah.
As well as MCI Concord.
Right.
We
this
agreed to
number.
defer that and anything else that may need to be deferred.
Okay.
With that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second by Suresh. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned at 9:56.
Yay, you did a great job. This is from